Welcome back and Happy New Year. I am coming back from a little bit of a holiday break, and I figured to start the year off I would work on a project that I have quite honestly been putting off for at least a couple of months now. What I have in front of me is a DRO, or the parts for a DRO, for my 13x40 Taiwanese lathe. This should change the way that I use the machine, so I figured the new year was a good time to install it. So that's what we're going to do today. I'll bring you in a little bit closer and show you what we're working with, and then we'll get started. All right, so here are all of the parts in a very unattractive pile on my bench. I'm not going to spend a lot of time going over this. This is just one of those cheap import DROs that you buy off of eBay. I honestly can't even remember the name of the seller that I bought this from, but I think that all of these import DROs are pretty similar. There are two scales. This is, of course, the shorter scale. This will be for the cross slide. These are glass scales. They come with this. This is like a protective cover, and they also come with these brackets. Every scale that I have ever bought has come with the same two exact brackets, and we'll kind of see how well we can actually utilize these. And it also comes with this random bag of hardware. Each scale comes with one bag. I think they just grab a handful of stuff and throw it in a bag, and you just try and make it work. But yeah, that is pretty much that. So let's head over to the lathe and figure out how to get this thing hooked up. So I've taken the backsplash off and we're here behind the machine. I've got the carriage pushed all the way towards the front of the machine, which should kind of give me some idea as to the maximum travel that I'll need in that direction. And I'm just trying to get a very general feel for where this thing is going to need to sit in this back and forth direction so that I can attach it to the carriage and still accommodate the full length of travel on the scale. And I have this bracket here for the flood coolant. What I'm thinking is I can use these existing holes in the bracket to attach my mount for the DRO. And because I have this coolant pipe now hanging down in roughly the same position that my bracket is going to be hanging, I know that as long as I have this reader forward of this sort of mark right here, I shouldn't have any problems with the far end of travel up towards the headstock. We will just go ahead and mark this end here. Now I can just move my carriage down towards the tailstock end until it stops, and then check the same thing, just making sure that when I'm lined up with that mark up front, that my bracket is going to give me room to hit this other far end of travel. All right, so I think this is pretty much where I want to be. Height-wise, I'm just going to come up to this seam for the gap bed, and I'm just going to make a rough mark here with my center punch. Okay, before I go drilling holes in my lathe, I want to get an idea as to what kind of adjustment I'm going to need in this direction. Because the back of the bed is cast and not machined, it's not going to be perfectly parallel to the ways themselves. And when this thing is mounted, we want it to be as parallel as possible in this direction and of course up and down. So I want to get an idea as to how bad the deviation is in this direction or in the bed, so that I have some sort of plan as to how I'm going to deal with it when I mount it. So I've got this dial indicator mounted to the carriage and it's reading on the back of the bed, and we're going to get some kind of idea as to how bad that deviation is. Okay, I don't actually think that's too awful. It's definitely a little bit wavy. The headstock end sits further in this direction than the tailstock end by about 30 thou, and then there's like a 30 thou hump in the middle. But in total, it's only like 65 or 70 thou of deviation, which I don't think is awful, and I should be able to deal with that with shims, and I'm thinking maybe rubber washers or something to allow for adjustment back and forth. I don't think that'll be a big deal, which means it's time to drill some holes. Here's what I'm thinking for the adjustment. I have this rubber O-ring and a washer. So these will sit behind the scale and the O-ring will sit against the bed itself. And I'm hoping that by tightening against these O-rings, I can move it back and forth enough to take out that deviation and get it relatively parallel to the ways. So I've been doing a little bit of fiddling with the rubber washers. Of course, we still have to adjust up and down, but I just wanted to make sure that this system would work. I think I've got it pretty close, so let's take a look. Well, I think that's going to work out quite well for us. 5 thou over this entire distance here, which I think is over 40 inches, if I remember correctly. 45 inches. Yeah, 5 thou over this entire 45-inch distance. That is plenty good enough for me, which means it is now time to focus on the bracket. Now that the scale is attached to the bed, I need to tie the reader to the carriage so that this moves when the carriage moves. I'm thinking that I'm going to use these existing holes in this bracket here. I'm just not exactly sure how yet. All right, here is the general plan of attack. This is one of those brackets that came with the kit. It has these 2 slots milled in it here. These slots line up with drilled and tapped holes on the bottom of the reader. So this bracket will connect right to the reader just the way that it is. However, it won't reach my carriage. So I will just use a piece of steel like this one as an extension. So I then connect this to the reader, connect it to my piece of steel, connect the piece of steel to the carriage, and now my reader is connected to my carriage. My carriage moves, my reader moves. And that's really all there is to it. So all that I have to do is I want to mill this down. It's thicker than I want it to be, and then I have to drill a couple holes for clearance for these bolts and also for these tapped holes here. So let's head over to the mill and get it done. And let's see how we did here. Do our holes actually line up? There's one. And there's two. All right, not bad. I have to say that I am happy about that. Always a cause for celebration. I'm just going to use a 1, 2, 3 block to kind of square everything up with this top surface so that I can reattach this in a somewhat repeatable manner, because I am going to have to take it back off to drill the holes once we mark the ones that we need to attach the bracket. But so far, I think that looks pretty good. All right, now we have to get the bracket attached, but we have to make sure that the reader is square when we mark our holes. If you look at the reader, you can see that you can kind of push it back and forth. It has this wobble, and it also has this little red piece of plastic. This little red piece of plastic is what you use to square up the reader and get rid of that wobble. So you want to kind of push the reader flat up against that piece of plastic to make sure that it's square. So that's what I'm going to do. And then I'll just mark my holes. And when I drill these holes, I'll drill them a little bit big so that there's a little room for adjustment, because we're definitely going to need it. I went ahead and drilled the holes off camera. I figured you didn't really need to see me drill 2 more holes. You're welcome, by the way. And now let's see if all of this goes together the way that it's supposed to. Now we just pull out our little spacer. And I mean, yeah, that looks like it's gonna work. I'm pretty happy with that. So that's 1 down, 1 to go. Okay, next I need to get the scale mounted to the cross slide. I have already removed the compound and the tool post just to make things a bit easier. I think that this one should be a bit more straightforward than the scale on the bed, because all of these surfaces here are ground. So squaring it up should be mostly just a matter of making sure that I'm square against all of my surfaces. I will of course check it with an indicator, but I think that using these surfaces should make it really easy to get in the ballpark at least. Also, the casting conveniently has this little cutout for the cable to pass through. That's really nice. You can kind of tell that this thing was designed to have a DRO attached. So really, the only thing left to figure out now is to make sure that I get this thing mounted in a spot that is going to accommodate the far ends of travel in both directions. I already have the cross slide pulled all the way back against the handle, and in this position, I can already see that if I mount the scale basically flush with this corner here, it will still leave room for travel in this direction. So I just want to run it all the way up to the forward direction and see what that looks like before I make my final decision. Okay, here is the cross slide run all the way forward. I'm actually off the feed screw altogether, and it does look like my best option is to mount this thing right where it is, pulled all the way back against this back corner here. So I'll go ahead and mark out my mounting positions with the scale right where it is, and then we can drill some holes. And just to be clear, in case it isn't obvious, I am just planning on mounting the reader right to this part of the saddle right here. I've brought the cross slide over to the mill rather than try and drill these holes with a hand drill. I figure this will be easier and much more accurate. I'm using my pointed center finder to find this first mark just so the scale is located where I want it to be, but then I'm not actually going to rely on the marks to drill the holes. Instead, I'm just going to center them in the casting using my edge finder. And I measured the mounting points on the scale, so I know that they should be 318 millimeters apart. So I'll just use my DRO to set that distance, and that should make sure that these holes are nice and accurate. All right, once again, fingers crossed that the holes line up. Well, that's pretty much the gist of it. Looks pretty good, I think. Still have to mount the reader, of course, but I do want to put an indicator on this just to see how level I am up and down as I traverse through the travel. And now I am off the screw. Yeah, I think that's going to work just fine. I can tweak that a little bit more and see how close I can get it, but I think that is definitely going to be good enough. Now I need to get the reader mounted, so I have my cross slide wound all the way out until it's off the feed screw, and then I've pushed it back against the feed screw. And then I've just taken the reader and pushed it back as far as it'll go, and I'm just going to use a transfer punch to make my marks. Well, that was almost a minor disaster. I had some trouble tapping these holes here. Initially, I tried to tap them metric so that I could use the hardware that came in those little bags. However, the only metric taps that I had were these Harbor Freight metric taps, and let's just say that it didn't work out well. So I guess I need some metric taps. I was able to save them though, and I tapped them the next size up in just a standard English tap size. I'm hoping that we should be good to go. I did put a little bit of Loctite in there because the cheap tap did some serious damage to the hole, and one of them I think only has a couple of threads to grab onto, but I think it should be okay. Okay, I am definitely happy with that, which means that both scales are fully installed and we are finally approaching the finish line of this project. The last part to install is, of course, the main unit, and first I think I want to get it all assembled with its mounting bracket, because that is going to give me a better idea as to how and where I'm going to mount it on the machine. Here is a look at everything that comes with the main unit. There's a bunch of little pieces, but it's actually pretty simple to put together. This is the bracket that connects to your machine, so we can set that aside. This is the swing arm that kind of lets it swing back and forth, so we can put that aside. And then this is all of the hardware. These two little brackets here, these are what connect to the unit, and we use these 4 little cap screws to do that. There are these 4 tapped holes on the bottom of the unit, and this is where these little brackets attach, one on each side. And so now we have these two little wings installed on the bottom here and this thing. I know it's hard to see, but these two little wings have these holes and this thing has a hole. So you just line those up. And then we have this socket head bolt that you push straight through the middle, cap it off on the other end with the nut. And then this is basically what allows the unit to swivel, I guess, back and forth, up and down, however you want to call it. And I'm sure you can see how the rest of this works. Then this bolt goes through one of these holes on one end of the swing arm. And then you can swivel it back and forth. You can swivel it up and down and just position it however you need to on your machine. So with all of this together, I just need to go figure out where I need to put it on my machine so that I can actually use it. I've been looking at this and I'm thinking that the best way for me to attach it is to just forego the arm and connect it directly to the machine. I can swivel it in this direction and in this direction, and I can see it and reach it easily while operating the machine if it's attached here. I don't, however, want to drill directly into the headstock because this is, of course, an oil-tight gearbox. But I can drill through this back cover here. And I guess that about wraps it up. This DRO is installed, it's functioning, it appears to be reading very accurately. I was going to put indicators on the different axes just to prove that this thing was accurate, but this video is already getting a bit longer than I really wanted it to be, so you're just going to have to trust me on that one. However, it does appear to be very accurate so far. One of the things that I really like about the particular scales that I chose for this unit is that they can reliably read out to a 10,000th of an inch. And in my opinion, a 10th is about as accurate as you can hope to get with this kind of machining operation. And by that, I mean, if you want to get more accurate than that, you really should be moving to grinding. And I think there's an argument to be made that if tenths matter, you should probably already be grinding. With that being said though, I do like the idea of the fact that I now have a measuring system on this machine that is reliable out to the physical limitations of the machine itself. Now, before I wrap this up, I did want to take just a quick moment to talk about these import DROs and out-of-the-box functionality or configuration. Basically, how do these things behave when you first pull them out of the box? Because I think that's important, especially for people who might be watching this video trying to decide if they want a unit like this for one of their machines, or maybe someone who's already purchased a unit like this and is watching this video for ideas on how to get it installed. I have a suspicion that for a lot of those people, the first time you pull this thing out of the box, plug it in and turn it on, it's likely not to behave the way that you're expecting it to. Just remember that when you buy these things, you're buying from someone who has a warehouse full of different units, different scales with different resolutions and different functionalities in the units, and they're just going to grab you whatever you pick from that drop-down box on eBay or Amazon and ship it. And they're not going to do any configuration or programming to make sure that your DRO is programmed to function the way that you're expecting and to read accurately from whatever scales that you chose. That's all stuff that you're going to have to do once you get the unit. I'm not going to go into that programming here because that's not what this video is about. Just know that that is something to expect, but it's not too complicated. They do give you an instruction booklet, which is worthless. My suggestion is to just get into the menus, start poking around, change parameters, see what it does, and you'll figure it out pretty quickly. And with all of that out of the way, I will finally stop talking and really wrap this thing up. As usual, if you have made it this far into the video, thank you so very much. I truly do appreciate each and every single person who watches, so thank you. If you're already a subscriber, thank you again. If you're not a subscriber, but you like what I do here and you feel like I've earned it, give me a like and a subscribe. If you feel like I haven't, let me know what I can do better in the comments down below. And as always, until next time, get out there, make something awesome. Most importantly, have some fun, and I hope to see you all again very, very soon.